first. And in this section, we're going to discuss how he was not serving cunt the entire time, but Peeta was, and in fact, Gale should be serving time in prison. He spends his time gaslight, gatekeeping, and being Gale War Crimes Hawthorne. He starts the book off jump by gaslighting Katniss and manipulating her emotions and keeping information from her. The very first thing he suggests as soon as we meet him on page is that he and Katniss should run away together. She goes, hey, wait, bud, what about the rest of my family? What about your family? He says, we'll bring them with us. We'll all live out here in the woods. But as the series progresses, we find out that Prim is not only not fond of the woods, she's fucking terrified of the woods. When Katniss tried to teach her to hunt, Prim, tried to bring the animals back to life and heal them rather than understand that, hey, this is dinner. Why then, in this bozo's head, did he think, let's all move out to the woods and form Covey Part 2, and we'll just roam around out here and we'll gather up our ingredients? Gatekeeping. He withheld information from Katniss the entire series. Gale War Crimes Hawthorne. This man is literally, from like book 2 and on, a literal criminal, okay? They've been criminals in book 1, but they're like he's a bad criminal from book 2 and onwards. He's like, let's go, we're gonna join the rebellion. She's like, hey buddy, hey, maybe we fucking don't do that. And then, for the 4 seconds that she's like, actually, you know what? Let's actually join the rebellion. He goes, what about Peeta? And when she thinks to stop and go, obviously I'm gonna bring Peeta, he goes, no, I don't wanna go. Actually, I changed my mind. I don't wanna go anymore. Meanwhile, as an aside, because this is about Peeta serving cunt, he goes, what about Gale? Because he is still an insecure little sweet baby girl. He goes, what about Gale? And she goes, yeah, bro, like, I'm gonna bring Gale. Like, be chill about it. And he's like, okay, fine, Katniss, I'll come. Quote verbatim on the page. Anyways. On-page examples. When we talk about the war crimes that he committed, a lot of people in the fandom believe, hey, he wouldn't have killed her sister on purpose. He wouldn't have killed innocent people on purpose. When Suzanne Collins herself gave us primary examples of, yes, the fuck he would, and you're going to find out about it the moment you start reading the book. As early as book 1, when Katniss meets Rue, a 12-year-old girl in the games, she finds out that in other districts, young children are brought into the workforce. Her district is the odd man out in this regard because in District 12, they don't join the workforce until they're 18 and up. So later on in book 3, when they have to crack the nut in District 2, Gale's suggestion is, let's kill them all. Drop the rocks on them. They'll suffocate. They'll die. She goes, hey, buddy, isn't that one of your death traps I caught you making with Beetee? And he goes, yeah. And she goes, don't you think, like, maybe minor to minor we should stick together? Minor with the ER, not an OR. And he goes, no. And in fact, and then he's the one who mentions that it'll be a slow and painful death compared to the death their fathers had in their own mines, because both of their fathers died in the mines. And he does not care. She goes, well, what if our rebels are in there and there are innocents in there? How we know about Beetee and his wires at 17 years old, how we know about Finnick at 14 years old and his trident, how we know about Joanna at 17 years old with her axes, and how we know about Rue climbing the trees. We know that these tributes work in these working forces in these other districts. So she says, what about the innocents that are in there unwillingly? And he goes, kill them all. I would do it. If I was in there, I'd be like, drop the rocks. And she pauses for a second and goes, I would too. But that's a weird decision to make for other people's loved ones. And he goes, agree to disagree. Buddy, war crimes. Moving on. So despite him knowing that, he does work on these death traps, as we discussed, because I got really hyped and I skipped a slide. But as we discussed, he does know these things. And these are the pages you can find these referenced on. I already have them bookmarked for you. Don't you worry. You slide right into my annotations and I will show you them. And he knows. Again, slow, suffocating death. He's so down. He's like, R.I.P. Or not in peace. Rest in misery. That's Gale Hawthorne. Okay. And then other people who, thought maybe he didn't mean for Prim to die. The only thing he says, when asked if it was his bomb that killed her sister, and I quote, was, "That was the one thing I had going for me, taking care of your family." Mockingjay, page 367. He was not sad that he killed her sister, or potentially killed her little sister that caused her to go not 1 but 2 rounds in the Hunger Games. He was sad that the only thing he had going for him in winning her affections was taking care of her family. And that is why statistics show that 100% of bad bitches hate Gale Hawthorne. Anyone else does not really matter. They're wrong. In the next section, we'll discuss the inevitability of Peeta winning Katniss's heart. We're going to be talking about the bread boy and the girl who's on fire and the inevitability of Peeta winning Katniss's heart in the Hunger Games. To do so, we're going to be largely focusing on the first book and first movie in the franchise and series, because I think it's most clear in the first book how apparent it was that Suzanne Collins herself foreshadowed that Peeta and Katniss were in-game. And I think it's also very important to touch on briefly that at the exact same time, Twilight, you know it well, I'm obsessed with it, and Sparkly Boy too, Twilight came out, and that was a love triangle, and so a lot of young adult marketing went towards, let's split them up into teams, because they were making a shit ton of money on Team Edward and Team Jacob shirts and merch, and wars were being started on Tumblr, etc. And that fed into the making of the Hunger Games movie, because it is foreshadowed from the very first books that Peeta and Katniss are endgame. Suzanne Collins herself sat down, fixed her little fingers to her keyboard, and made sure we knew it. I'm going to be talking about a brief stint of time in Katniss's life that was, in my opinion, the most formative, which is January through May in her 11th and then 12th year. A lot of very traumatic, very important things happened to her that shaped her ability to cope and deal with things, as well as changing history in Prim forever. In January, one of the most bitter of the winter months, Katniss's father was tragically killed in a mine collapse with Gale's dad, and it devastated her family. It devastated everyone who cherished her father, and most especially it devastated her mother, who took to her bed. The capital, the government, being who they are, gave them 1 month's supply of money to basically kick Katniss's mom in the ass and be like, hey, go get a job, get over it, grieve while you can, but get back to work. Katniss's mom obviously needed more time because the love of her life just died, and she couldn't get over it. It's very important to note at this point in time, too, and for future reference, keep this locked in, Katniss's dad stole Katniss's mom from Peeta's dad. That's going to be very important in this slide and in the future. There is a very distinct difference between parts of District 12. So, for example, Katniss and the Everdeens live in the Seam, which is where the miners and coal workers work, and then there are the merchants. And the miners and the miners' kids think that the merchants are very well off, etc., etc. That does also get discussed later. They're not as well off as Katniss and Gale think they are, but they are still doing better and are more proper, quote, quote, than the kids in the Seam. This is also very important because Katniss's mother is from the merchant side originally, and she was won over by Katniss's dog of a dad because he had a voice that would silence birds when he sang. That's very important, because later on you find out that when Peeta hears Katniss sing for the very first time when he was 5, that he was a goner like his dad. Quote verbatim, bitch, in the book, on page. Anyways, meanwhile, what's Gale's best line? You can't name one. I mean, you wouldn't be able to, but you get me. Okay, anyways. So, her dad passes away in January. They're giving a minor amount of money. Her mom is basically told cope or die. And Katniss learns a very crucial life skill in that moment, which is survive at all costs. And survival was only important because she could then help the people she loved survive. The people she loved being her mother and Prim. This is also could be said psychologically that she developed this because her father died and she could not help him. But I digress. This skill is important throughout the rest of her life. We see it in the 74th annual Hunger Games later on, but we also see it referenced in the one time that I truly believe that Gale knew Katniss, which is when he said she will choose whichever of us she can't survive without. That's also important in this because survival is referenced in this several times. We move on and we find her in the next 3 months in March. This is, their wares are gone. Everything is gone. Their resources are low, their hopes are low, the money is gone, and her family is starving to death. She's out in the streets trying to sell Prim's old baby clothes, but let's be honest, the people in District 12, like many other districts, are poor and they don't want raggedy clothes when they could spend that money on something else. And so though the people there, we find out later, not through our unreliable narrator, Katniss Everdeen, that these people care about her so much, but there's only so much even they can do. Merchant Square is closing down, and she decides to go to the merchants' houses, but it's trash day, and so while she's pillaging through their trash, she's realizing the cans are empty, she's not going to get anything from them, but she smells bread. You remember the baker, and the fact that Katniss's mom left him for Katniss's dad. Well, his wife hates the entire Everdeen line for that. Saw her rifling through the cans, ran her off, and this is where Katniss falls down by a pig pen, unable to get back up, unable to find that will to live, succumbing to an existence where she does not exist, succumbing to failure at keeping her family alive. What she didn't realize is that while she was doing this and while she was succumbing to this inevitability, Peeta was in the bakery burning a loaf of bread because he could not see the girl he cared about starving in the streets. But what she didn't know is that the baker's hoe-ass wife was also abusive, and she beat his ass for it. So he risked, an 11-year-old boy risked a beating just to give her a burnt loaf of bread. That's also very important later on, but it's important throughout the story. It should also be touched on later that I truly believe there is so much significance in bread in this series, or Suzanne was just hankering for some Panera. That takes us into April, where we kind of think we are at this point, the beginning of April, end of March, when Katniss goes to school and she sees the bruises on Peeta's face, and she knows for sure that he got his ass beat for burning the bread. We never really know if his mother finds out that he gave her the bread, but we do know Katniss sees him with a bruised and swollen face. At this point, they're both embarrassed. He's embarrassed because his face is swollen, and he's done this thing, and he thinks she's probably ashamed, and she is. She looks away, but it's at that moment when she looks away that she sees a dandelion, and it is that one sprig of dandelion that gives her hope to continue on. And it's the exact moment that she remembers what her dad taught her before he died about all of the plants and foods that she could sustain herself on from nature. She was literally told by her dad that if she could find herself, she would always be okay. She would never go hungry. So that moves us on to May 8th, when she takes out the first tesserae in her name. By the time she turns 16 and we meet her in the 74th Annual Hunger Games, we find out that she has taken out 20. For reference again, Prim's name was in the Reaping one singular time, as this was her 12th year, and Prim's name was called. Katniss does not hesitate to volunteer for her sister, because as you know from the previous slides and previous discussions, survival is the only point. And what is survival to Katniss? It is the ability to survive to let other people live. She was absolutely devastated to see Peeta's name get drawn next. But not because she loves him yet, despite the fact that he loves her, but because he gave her hope in a time where she could not drag it up from the depths of hell. And he was going to die. That then brings us to July 4th, officially, which is what I was just talking about. I always do this. And that, of course, brings us to Peeta Mellark, or the boy with the bread. Without the boy who threw the bread into the flames, you would never have had the girl on fire. Read this one yourself. I've already gone over it. This is just for you to memorize and get it ingrained into your head. We've gone over this. Survival is important to her. He is the reason she knows that she can continue, right? Okay, there will be a test after class. Now, these are quotes as seen in the books. You can use my annotations, and you'll see that they get remarkably more feral the more it goes on. These are in book 1. To this day, I can never shake the... Oh, you just read them, okay? I turned it around for the viewers at home. Moving on! I'm already dyslexic, and I turned it around for these bitches. I can't read it. These are on-page examples in book 1 of them being compatibly foreshadowed, okay? I will never turn this shit around for y'all again. That's so embarrassing! I knew every other slide! Alright, moving on.
Is it?
Next week, next presentation, we are going to be discussing, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, and we're actually going to talk about For Prim, which is a quote at the end of the book in which she, Katniss, agrees to do the games with the capital children. Today we're going to be talking about fan theory and a popular fan conversation that does not involve love triangles as much. Why did Katniss say For Prim when she agreed to a symbolic games with the capital children? I would argue that we should be asking why Prim directly to Suzanne Collins, but because she barely ever does interviews, I spent my time this reread thinking about how devastated I was on my first read and how I was absolutely shocked that Prim died and felt betrayed, because I was like, there's nothing in this book that indicates that she is going to die. This is so shady. Like, you have to foreshadow that. However, on this reread, I searched and searched, and I found several instances of foreshadowing throughout the entire series. These 4 in particular were the most significant that I found, because in one interview that Suzanne did do, she said she knew as soon as she started the series that Prim wasn't going to make it. As soon as we start the book, Katniss is reaching for Prim in the bed. She's searching for her and she's trying to find her, but the bed is empty. That, I think, reflects in a nightmare she has after Prim dies, when she realizes that Prim is a bird, and to save Prim, she has to let her go. And as you know, the entire series point is her saving Prim, which is why fans often get upset and are like, the whole point was her saving Prim. Yes, but another point of interest is Snow's use of roses as kind of a death calling card, and Prim's name literally being Primrose, to the point where when Prim dies and Peeta brings Katniss primroses in Prim's memory, it freaks Katniss out until she realizes they're eating primroses. I think that this is interesting because it almost alludes at first, on first glance, to Snow's culpability in Prim's death, and in a way, in a roundabout way, obviously, while he does not take on guilt, without him, none of this would have happened. So I think that's interesting. We also have Rue. Her name also is literally a small yellow flower in the meadows. And this part was devastating for me to think about. But at the end of the book, in the meadow scene in the epilogue, Katniss says, "My children do not know that their playground is a graveyard." I realized that both Rue and Primrose are small yellow flowers found in the meadows, and they both ended up back in the meadows in the end, and I will never, ever be okay again. But then we get also to Katniss comparing the Capital Children's loss of lives to the children in District 12 when she is seeing them disoriented and confused and shuffling towards what eventually is their herding kennel to protect Snow, but then also to lose their lives as they send in the airstrikes, they being Coin and Co. But now that we've gotten through the why of it all, despite it not being fair, we're going to talk about the for. This brings us to a conversation with Boggs, one of Katniss's mentors in this book, which his death was foreshadowed in the fact that he's a mentor. Mentors die. Honestly, as sad as I was to see Boggs go, I was really scared Haymitch was going to die because he's a mentor. He's literally a mentor. So Suzanne, yet again, kind of turned the tables on us with that, with giving Katniss not one but 2 other mentors, being Boggs and Cinna, that passed away in lieu of Haymitch dying. But this is a conversation she has with Boggs in which they discuss a shift of power and Katniss's responsibility in it. She's like, why the fuck do all these old people have beef with me? What did I do? I didn't do anything to deserve this. And he goes, quite frankly, you are one of the most influential people in Panem. Who are you going to vote for when the dust settles? And she goes, I don't know. I don't want this. I've never thought about that before. And he goes, that's the problem. Your immediate answer wasn't Coin. And she will take that as good as you saying you were against her, which basically signs your own death warrant. So either get on board or get off the ship. And Katniss has to really ruminate on that, but not for long because that's right before Boggs dies. And then he transfers the controls to her, and she, for a brief stint of time, lies to her entire friend group and crew and says, oh yeah, he wanted me to kill Snow, slay. And everybody just goes with it. Because Snow sucks, obviously. Everybody goes with it for a while, and then she wakes up feeling guilty from a little nappy nap, and she's like, I did lie. And they're like, duh, bitch, we know. And she's like, how? I had such a good poker face. And they were like, no, you didn't. This was your only demand. That and Peeta's safety. You forgot about everyone else, and you were just like, I kill Snow, Peeta's safe. And then you were like, oh yeah, these other people probably should be safe too. We're not dumb. Snow's secrets are out in the wild. And Finnick has exposed him for all the world, and they're like, he's not coming out of that mansion. And they're like, how do we get him out? And Katniss thinks on it, and she goes, we give him me. Because if Snow is anything, he's an arrogant son of a bitch. We give him me. He is going to want to be the final victor. He is going to want to take a bow over my corpse, and he's going to want to do that with the most eyes on him that he can possibly manage. He's going to want an audience. He's going to want to make a game of it. He's going to want the spectacle. Because what does a narcissist love? An audience. She goes, we give him me. And they go, okay, and then you're dead. And she goes, no, hold on. While we give him me, Gale's in the crowd and he shoots Snow. Now, keep in mind too here, Peeta is the only one who goes, no, are you stupid? And Gale goes, let's put it on the back burner. I'm not against it. But maybe like we think of something else first. So this is the original plan, and this is really important to remember because nobody talks about this in this conversation of why for Prim. This plan is still important even though it gets vetoed because at the end of the day, Snow and Coin are two sides of the same coin. Before we even meet Coin, we learn this because Katniss is meeting rebels escaping from District 8 and they're like, their primary functionality in District 13 was nukes and weaponry before they went dark, before the dark days. Katniss is going, why didn't they help us? Where are they? If they're there, where are they? You're wild. That's not true. You're lying. But she doesn't let it go. Not entirely, because that's when we get the whole conversation between her and Gale when she's like, yeah, let's go. And he's like, yeah, let's go. And he goes, wait, but what about Peeta? And she goes, well, of course I'm bringing Peeta. And he goes, no, I don't want to go anymore. I changed my mind. I don't want to go anymore. But then there are two significant conversations that happen at the end of the book. One between her and Snow when she goes to get a rose for his funeral, and one with her and Gale. She sees Snow, she's shocked because obviously that was not her intention, and then he apologizes for her sister's death and she thinks there is no end to your cruelty, and he goes, you think I did this? Girly pop, that's wasteful. And I think a lot of us focus really heavily on the wasteful commentary because that's so icky and so gross, but we don't take enough consideration into the almost reverence that Snow talks about Coin's movements in this last part of the books. He's like, no, because honestly, girl power, like she duped us. Because at the end of the day, it's wasteful for him, but in his eyes, he would have done the exact same thing that Coin did if it benefited him with the district children. So the loss of life for him wasn't the thing that was grotesque. It was the fact that there was no means that he could be benefited from it. And that's when Katniss goes, you're a liar. And he goes, no, my dear Miss Everdeen, I thought we agreed never to lie to each other. That quote in and of itself plays over and over in her mind when she has the next conversation she has when Gale brings her a single arrow and he's like, hey, this is for the execution. It's supposed to be symbolic. The last shot fired of the war. And she goes, what if I miss? And he goes, you won't miss. And there's something to be said, though you know I hate to give Gale credit for anything, about the foreshadowing in even that quote, mentioning, no, you won't miss. Because I think that it stands for, you will hit the true mark. This is also where we have the conversation with Katniss. She goes, was it your bomb? And he goes, does it matter? So he gives her the single arrow, tells her she won't miss, and brings us to the symbolic games. So this is when Coin comes to the remaining victors, R.I.P. King, and she says, I think we should hold one more game. One more game where we line up the capital children, toss their name in a reaping ball, and we pull tributes out of the capital children to let them know you're getting what you deserve. Peeta goes, no, are you stupid? And Annie also votes no, stating that Finnick, my unproblematic prince, would also vote no if he were here. Joanna and Inobaria do vote yes, bringing us down to Haymitch and Katniss remaining. Katniss thinks about it, and with Boggs' conversation, Snow's conversation, and Gale's conversation playing in her mind, though we don't see it on page, we know that those are the things going through her mind. she votes yes for Prim. That brings us to the rose and the single arrow. These are important because if you remember, Katniss went to gather one single rose symbolically to pin in Snow's lapel as her taking his calling card for death. She asks Coin to make sure that it's pinned in his lapel for the one shot, and then she thanks Coin. And I think both the thank you and the for Prim are, again, so important together. In the same way that Caesar saying et tu, Brute was important, because one less wound would not have stopped Caesar's death, but he needed in that moment to say and you to voice the betrayal. And I think for Prim and the thank you were Katniss's way of saying, I know what you did. And more succinctly, it's her way of telling the president to go fuck herself in a pretty little bow that she'll choke on later. And the single arrow significance that Gale gives to Katniss is that I think that that was Coin's way of knowing if she gave Katniss 2 arrows, she was one of the people that was going to die. If she only gave Katniss 1 arrow, she knew, and we reference back to the original plan again, that Katniss wanted nothing more than for Snow to die. So if she only had 1 shot, she was going to take it out on the man that she's wanted dead since she woke up. But keep in mind, same coin, different face, with Snow smiling, almost saying in her head, oh my dear Miss Everdeen, I thought we agreed not to lie to each other. Katniss adjusts her arrow and fires into President Quinn's chest. Still though, a lot of people wonder about the ambiguity of Suzanne Collins not having Katniss go, I knew it. I knew what she did. Because at that point, up to Coin's death, there's never confirmation that Katniss was 100% certain that it was 13's bombs. People argued that it was an ambiguous death, that Gale's bombs did not kill Prim. Just a few pages later, on page 320, Katniss does confirm for you that she knew. She references Snow using the Hunger Games, but instead of using the Hunger Games that Coin has just proposed, she specifically talks about parachutes ending a war. And this is confirmation for us. Katniss knew that it was 13's bombs and thereby Gale's own designs. Coin thought the parachutes would expedite the war. And that is her confirmation at the end of the day that she was doing this for Prim. She was agreeing, lulling Coin into a false sense of security. He gives her this peace only to then turn it against her. Still people who go, oh, well, Katniss maybe had a momentary lapse of judgment. Maybe she was dealing with rage and grief, and maybe she did agree because maybe she did want the capital children to suffer. And I think that there's something to be said too about that being just completely incorrect, because no matter what, even when Peeta was captured by the Capitol, even though she was absolutely bereft, she still took care of her prep team, which we don't get in the movies versus the books, which is where we get the famous line, I think you'd be pretty in any color, which we'll get to that a different day because you don't know what that means. But that's one of my favorite lines in the book, and it makes me cry every time. However, she was still kind with Cinna. She was still kind with her prep team. She still placed a kiss on Tigress's cheek for Tigress's kindness in hiding them, even if it was selfish. So I just don't think that then Katniss would resort to let's kill capital children to make a point. However, I think using her own original plan, lining up an arrogant ruler to stand over and take a bow over a corpse, proves, one, that Snow and Coin are 2 sides of the same coin, and it also falls exactly in line with what she had planned to do to Snow originally. She was going to set him up in front of an execution he couldn't miss. There was going to be a sharpshooter that would take out him instead of the person who was meant to be executed. Instead of changing that plan altogether, the colors of the board shifted, but the board itself didn't change. There was an arrogant president, a person set to be executed, and a person who is aiming for the president instead. That ends this presentation. The next presentation, get to segment 5, which is the relationship we deserved. Much like Taylor Swift, if Joanna Mason had come out when I was in middle school, my life would have been forever changed. So today we're going to be talking about Joniss, the relationship we deserve. Let's take a look at the data, shall we? Let's run that back one more time for science. Unfortunately for me, and everyone on the Joniss tags on AO3, that ship only lives in my cerebral cortex and theirs, so we will be talking about their friendship that was also robbed from us. This is due to the capitalification of Joanna Mason. In the books, Joanna was a rich character with deep issues, only driven to the craze of the District 7 crazy girl in her games that won because the Capitol wanted her to be perceived as having snapped and lost her mind in her games. Now, did she go a little crazy? Did she go a little off the rails? Yes, we stand, okay? However, she did so due to the manipulation of the Capitol and its propaganda, and we were stripped of the humanizing aspects of her that we see in the books for film. Thusly, the film almost fed in to the propaganda that the Capitol wanted us to believe. Because if we look at the pages of connection between Katniss and Joanna, we notice that this shaped these two characters so importantly throughout the books. In fact, I would be willing to argue that most people who think that Katniss is not a girl's girl or Katniss is a pick-me only feel that way if they've watched the movie. Oftentimes, they're referencing the fact that she doesn't like other women, she's distrustful of other women. They even use references like her mother's abandonment and betrayal to feed that. But I would argue, what about her relationships with Rue, with Madge, with Max, with Iris, with Joanna, with Greasy Say? These are all relationships that were stripped of, other than Rue's, in film. And that's only because they saw fit for Rue's to feed the first movie's storyline. However, Madge and Greasy Say were kind of combined into this nameless character at the very beginning of the Hunger Games that gives Katniss a pin, never giving light to the relationship that Katniss had individually with these two characters. It stripped her of her humanity in that way, and I feel also that was to feed into the love triangle aspect, because it makes it look like the only two connections she has are Peeta and Gale, occasionally Cinna and Haymitch. However, even those relationships aren't delved into as much as they should, but that's again a different PowerPoint for a different day. We will focus on Katniss is a girl's girl. She goes out of her way to protect these people. There are scenes in the books when she finds out that District 12 was bombed and obliterated that she grieves Madge. She is comforted by Greasy Say after Prim's death. These are women in her life that she had close connections with just because she had close connections with them. Iris could be construed as a friend of circumstance. However, she was inherently protective of Iris from the very beginning. And so I think it's important when we talk about Katniss and Joanna to mention those other relationships, because if you look at, for example, Madge in contrast with Joanna, it shows Katniss at two very different stages in her life, right? She's accepting the Mockingjay pin with Madge at the very beginning, and this is this soft girl who has a very Hagrid history with the games in her family. And then we see it in contrast to Joanna, who has her own horrid stories with the games and with President Snow. And this is Katniss accepting her role as the Mockingjay. So one has her accept the pen, the other one has her accept the role. These are moments that I feel are really necessary to touch on. When the Jabberjays are attacking them in the second book, Joanna says, they can't hurt me. I don't have anyone left that I love. And that will forever haunt me, because 1,000 different things played through my mind in theory when she said that. Did Snow kill her family? Did Snow make her one of the Capitol whores? What did Snow do to her? And so people often get on this tangent about, okay, but she voted yes to the games and she had no reason to. Did she have no reason to? Because I direct you to this section when she has a full mental breakdown when she is training with Katniss to go on the mission to defeat Snow. And she has a full mental breakdown because they test her in water, in which the Capitol, the reason why we see her head is shaved in the movies, because the Capitol used electricity and water to torture her for the entirety of the time that she was in their grasp. Nobody talks about that in contrast to the movie, because they don't have that reference. They have very brief, minor details of her torment, and they just think she's some hot, crazy lady. But she's crazy for a reason, and she is hot, period. Like, she's crazy and hot, period. But she has a reason. Anyways, then we move on to Katniss bringing Joanna a bundle of pine needles. I think it's really important to look at this entire scene, because this shows the exact moment when they both realize, oh my fucking god, we're friends. Katniss brings Joanna a bundle of pine needles. You do not get this in the movie, Joshua. She gives her a bundle of pine needles to remind her of home, because Joanna is having a mental breakdown. They don't know when she's going to see District 7 again, and Joanna says, it smells like home, and Katniss says, I hope so. That was my hope. Tee-hee. And then, upon realizing she's not going to get to go kill Snow and exact her own revenge, she looks to the only other person in the world that she trusts with this mission, and she says, swear it. And Katniss says, I swear it, on my life. And she said, not on your life, on your family's. Because she knew that Katniss's life did not mean enough to Katniss, but her family's did. And in that moment, she entrusts her. And then we see Katniss use a nickname that Joanna uses for her, Brainless, further symbolizing their full circle friendship. And we deserved more.